Give me a sign now.
Okay.
Switch on. Okay.
It's readable.
Здравейте. Hello. We're gonna speak in English again because we've realized that it's much more, how is this, reasonable and easy to do it in English. I want to introduce Peter Bosch. He's one of the part of the duo with Simons. She's not with us tonight, but I believe she's virtually with us. It's really nice to have them here. They have this beautiful installation in the gallery space. I believe most of you already saw it and hear it because it's a sound piece. Actually, what is very unique in their practice that they create these sound machine, these music machines, and Peter is going to talk about this right now.
Yes.
Yes. So I give the word to
Okay.
Peter.
Thank you for having us here, or at least me, and everybody else involved in the DAFest, and of course also the Instituto de Cervantes. Anyway, I'll go back to the core. This is also on the, more or less the same text is also on the DAFest website, but it covers very well what we do. Well, we always like to say that we make music machines. Many people would say sound installation or multimedia or whatever. But we like to call our work music machines because often people discuss if what we do or sound artists in general is really music. And by just saying it's a music machine, you overrun this discussion, you declare that it's music. So that's one part. And it's also nice to call it a machine because what we search is actually very lively, complex organisms, you could almost say autonomous organisms. But we always use industrial components like motors, electrical motors, or compressed air, things like that. So there are many things in common with machines, but it's also very much a paradox because what we are searching is not a machine that reproduces very precise things, which normally a machine does. Our machines actually produce, well, we like to say that they produce energy, but a kind of spiritual energy, nothing like electricity, or they use electricity actually. Anyway, I think here's, so what I said, the creative potential of our work is very important. How do we do this? To build unpredictable machines. So, of course, there are some software and some hardware who controls the machines, but their output, you never know exactly what will happen. And we ourselves, we don't do that either. That's one of the reasons why we do it. We like to be surprised by our own work. And a very strong thing there, to achieve that is using vibration and resonance, because it's a very simple way to get in the field between order, chaos, and, well, you have also quasi-chaos, quasi-order, etc. So our work always is in that large area. Well, I think everything I said now is in this few phrases. I think to bring into context the work that's here, it's good to do a little overview of some earlier works. We work together since 1985, so there are quite some works. In the beginning, we also did things with dancers and maybe even music for theater without performing ourselves. But since 1990, our main work is what we call autonomous music machines. One of the things we didn't like so much, or didn't like, it's very nice to make autonomous machines, put them on, and you don't have to deal with egos of performers, dancers, musicians, whatever. Your work is done, you put it on, and that's it. And it's also interesting to see how far you can get, because we really pretend to make music without performers, without speakers usually. I know that, and where you can find this is more or less in things like computer music, electronic art, also festivals of contemporary music. But what is very nice is also that we almost everywhere we are kind of exception. This problem about what people think is music, for instance, also people who make computer music have this. Many people have it very difficult to get music from speakers. And maybe it's easier to get music from machines because you forget all about this idea of a performer on stage. Anyway, it's a bit a kind of challenge for us to produce music in an unusual way with unusual musical instruments. Well, I'll go quickly through some works and I'll play a video and then maybe we can get into an interesting discussion. So this is Simone. I thought I'll show who she is. She's very important in our work, but I'm usually the one who does more. I'm more the face now than she is, but she's there too. And the picture is in our village with a nice rural wall. This is without doubt, our most known work. It's already quite old. The very first version was of 1993, looking very different. It was much smaller. It was just, where is it? Yeah, there it is. It was just columns of boxes, and there were only 3 columns of 3 boxes. That was the very first version that was made in 1993 with students of mechanical engineering at the university in Holland. We are both Dutch. And so we presented on that show 3 columns of boxes, and the students made, I think, it was 1993, they made, how you call this? A film of it. Actually, it was only the front side and the side of these boxes. And then I'll go, this is another show. The thing we have been using most in our work is a vibration motor. That's an electric motor with here eccentrical weights. And when they turn, you get vibration, like you have also with a bad wheel of a car or a washing machine that's not standing well. But it's a very common thing in industry, especially, for instance, to move powders or in a silo, or where you cannot use a band because of reasons of hygiene or things like that. Often a vibration motor is used to move things by vibration. And what is very interesting, this is coming from the students. Any construction, for instance, I don't know if you know this kind of graphics, but here you see the vibration speed, and here you see how much the certain construction moves. And you can see anything on Earth has a resonant frequency. Well, many people know, for instance, like a pendulum. This is the resonant frequency of this pendulum. So this one is just one resonant frequency, but a more complex construction has more resonant frequencies. And you see that when we change the motor speed, at certain points, there's an enormous movement, and at the rest, nothing. And that's more or less what we use in all our vibration works. Like this construction, these boxes can move vertically, they can shake like this. This you call rotation, this you call translation. They can move like this, they can move like this, and combinations of boxes you can also see as a body with different resonant frequencies. They are connected with springs, so this is a very complex construction, and when you have various sources of vibration, it really can produce a very complex behavior. Well, one of the first works was also one of the biggest, but it's interesting to use the same system, this vibration motors and resonance, in various ways. So I'll run through some of these works and maybe put on a video then, and then go to the more recent works. If there are really questions, because it's understandable, you may interrupt me. So after that first version, actually the first versions were smaller. The one you saw, the biggest one, we made what lasted until 1998 that we made it so big. The biggest version is 12 meters wide and 2.5 meters high. We thought, let's make a kind of portable work with boxes and springs. So for a computer music conference in Hong Kong, we just used cardboard boxes, and we put some pieces of wood in it and also iron rods, so it's not as fragile as it looks like. And so we could bring even all the cardboard boxes folded in a plane as normal luggage, etc. So it was a good idea, but it was much more work to put it together, and Hong Kong in summer is so humid that they even got a bit weak. And we did it maybe 2-3 times more, but what is nice is that you can really build easily, not heavy constructions, but it's actually not so practical, and the sound wasn't that strong as with real wood. But these ideas brought us to a new phase, which is a more the same form, but then is in wood. This is a version which has another name. The title is Springtime in a Small Town. It's a stolen title from a Chinese film, and it's in a wood in Belgium. There's a very nice place in Belgium, in the town of Neerpelt, and they have about 15 sound artworks permanently in a kind of wood. It's also interesting how a work can change in the context. This work doesn't produce so much sound and is much more spiritual, while the real big inside work is very loud and for some people frightening. This is a product that came thereafter. This is one of the very rare cases that we work with musicians. One of the reasons is that it was a commission by a music group. And it was interesting because it's a kind of paradox. We try to make autonomous machines, and then people are playing together with it. So it was quite structurized, the piece. There was a kind of timeline, and they knew which of these constructions would start to move. And there were some instructions for the players. And well, here each time you have to adapt things. These are the inside of mattresses, and those with metal springs, without all the stuff around it. Cut the downside of a bottle you can cut with special machines, and then they sound more or less like bells. And it's very fragile, so what we had to do, you probably can see it, this is such a motor, but it's put vertically, so it tends more to shake the things like this than like that. So that was something that we only did for this work. I show some pictures also to show you that it's really very much site-specific work. Technically, it's, for instance, this work which is called Cantan un huevo, something like they sing an egg, but it means also they make a lot of noise. The second show was in a glass pavilion built by the architect Tschumi in Groningen in Holland. And it was very particular because it doesn't have a horizontal floor, so we had to also adapt. Actually, the work is flat, and the floor is not flat. It looks like it's not the way. It was also interesting, but we are also sound artists, and for the sound part, it wasn't such a good space, but visually it was very interesting. This is in a museum in Oslo. Here we had a lot of possibilities with tiny spots and things like that, so it became also very theatrical. It's maybe a bit boring not to have sound, but I think it's better to play a video with all the works one after the other instead of interrupt. The next work I'm going to talk briefly about is one of the few works where image is also important. Many of our works start with one kind of magical experience. In this case, this was the reflection of the sun in a washing place in the village where we live. We live in a mountain village in Spain near Valencia. And at a certain hour in the morning, you get the reflections of the sun and projections on the wall. And it's a washing place with a natural spring, so sometimes there's more water, sometimes there's less. So it's a perfect machine that does something with image that we like to do with sound. So we thought we want to make a machine that also produces images, unpredictable images, and later we also found an interesting way to produce a sound. And this is something typical of our work. It starts with some kind of impression. Sometimes it lasts maybe a few weeks or months. Sometimes before everything comes together, it can last years. I'll come just shortly back to this work. This work, you hear only glass sounds. And the starting point was when we were at a ship from Kiel to Oslo. And not for this work, but for another work. And in these ferries, you have these shops where you can buy alcohol. And you have all these shelves full of bottles. And it was very special because of the movement of the boat and especially the vibration of the motor. There was a kind of sound that moved from left to right and around in space because of the resonance of the bottles in the shelves. So we thought we want to recreate this experience. And then finally, we found this idea of mattresses putting bottles in that can be shaken. And that was maybe 9 years later or something when this work finally was created. But it still has some similarities with the source. I have a sound recording of these shelves, and so it didn't go that far away from the starting point. This work got very much further. You still have reflections, but it is a very industrial setting. It's a metal box on springs with a vibration motor, and then we have a neon light and fluorescent light reflected in either car waste oil, black oil, or sometimes olive oil. This is olive oil, that's why it's a bit green, because sometimes a museum doesn't want the other oil because they think it's dangerous. Both work very well. You need an oil that has a lot of reflection, and we want to have it very black and white, so the black oil seemed ideal, but of course with video you can change contrast, and you can even get olive oil quite black. So what we do then is moving this box with the vibration, and we usually have two screens, one which produces stills every 6 seconds of the image, and the other on the other we show the live image. And it's very surprising, the images that you can make with stills, because of course it moves so fast that you see a movie, you don't see stills. So it's very nice to see this contrast on this picture. They're very similar actually, but sometimes not at all. And well, so this is the source we usually use. This is a fluorescent round light and neon lights, and a symbol which is very recognizable when it moves. So you think maybe of the start of a movie. You can also think of targets in the military. I mean, in the time of Iraq war, you saw a lot of these images, and it was an image that at the time that we have chosen, this was very often on television because of the propaganda films of hit targets. So, and well, this is one of the shows. This was an enormous projection, and I have some stills. This is, for instance, a still, and indeed here you can see the pattern and there, and so that was one of the reasons to choose this thing. Well, here I like very much that it becomes very organic, a kind of organisms. And well, this is next thing, the sound. Oh, you will hear. What we did for the sound was using 2 contact microphones. So here there are speakers, and then process the sound with some simple electronics like guitar pedals, and make a kind of techno-like sound with a kind of bass and snare pattern and electronic sounds. You will hear it on the video. So it's actually a kind of live film laboratory with live sound and live image. Well, what we also do is doing workshops using the same motors, and as Marinos also said, workshops bring something else to you than when you just focus on your own work, because other people do other things, no? And this was a very funny workshop. That was a year ago in Leipzig, because we worked, or I worked actually with a Russian guy, Sergei heet he, of course, like many. We worked with refugee kids from maybe 4 until up to 11 years old, and it was a hell of a mess because they were freaking out completely, and the idea was that they made a kind of robots and they moved through space because of the vibration motor. So here we mainly used chairs and vibration motors. So just to show you that you can also do completely different things, not so clean and and efficient. Or what we like in our own work is to get rid of any redundancy. And but when you work in a workshop, you can end up completely differently. So these were 3 of the robots they made. Well, maybe it's good now to have a little interruption to go to a movie made of a retrospective in 2009 with all these vibration projects, because more or less since, I don't know when, yeah, you could say around 2012 or something. The last years we are not so strict. We usually don't use these motors anymore, but we still are looking for complex works. But you could say this strict form of motors, springs, and vibration and resonance is a bit, it's not so strict anymore. So let's finish the pure vibration works. Well, there's also another work. It starts with one of our very first works with vacuum cleaners it's much louder than the work here. But what is interesting is that you also reinvent your own things, because the work that's here, I heard it already several times, that people who know our work a very long time, that they say, oh, this reminds me of the sound of the vacuum cleaners. So it's absolutely not one of the traditional vibration works. It's before, it's of 89. So let's go. Is there sound? Maybe not yet. Why not? I don't know. What? Is it on? Or it's not connected? Maybe not on. Is it on? I don't see that. Okay. Maybe the light on? So, well, what can I say about it? Most of the works you saw were, this is nice, were vibration works, but there are also some works that are more, have to do with the work that's here. Actually, the first works, Ultimo Esfuerzo Rural, so, which means ultimate rural effort. We started to tell also something about how society is changing, using materials that are maybe getting used less, or everybody now, especially in electronic art, is so focused on high-tech, Android, phones, computers, but there's still so much other things in the world, like wine barrels, pitchforks, old stuff like you see here from Bulgaria, and we use them to do completely different things. So what we try in this series of Ultimo Esfuerzo, either industrial or rural, is to use objects from an other area in a contemporary electronic way. At the exhibition there, well, this one is pre all other projects, but you all you saw also big wine barrels that were used as what we call in Spain zambombas. You have also in the samba music, you have these very small instruments that you play with your hand that those things. Maybe in Bulgaria you have also this type of instruments. In Holland we also have it, the rommelpot or the foekenpot. It's one of the oldest, very most primitive instruments where you make sound by friction on a stick, and then it's amplified by a resonant body and an animal skin. So one of the works of the Ultimo Esfuerzo Rural is recreating a work with these lion's roars, is actually the English word, with barrels of this size, and then goat or cow skins of this size. And of course, when you change size of an object, you also change frequency range of what comes out of it. So we managed to get extreme low sounds that are below audio and in the audio range, and we amplify, of course, the audible part with big bass amps, but there's also kind of vibration you can't hear. It's really very low frequencies that these barrels produce. And the other first Ultimo Esfuerzo Rural piece, we were searching the other extreme of sound, this kind of unpleasant overtones that you have when objects scratch on glass, also this kind of overtones you hear when somebody is learning to play the violin. And here was a bit the challenge to make music with sounds that usually are not used or even experienced as unpleasant. And for each project we try to find a new area that's maybe not explored or in a different way. And so here, Ultimo Esfuerzo 1 and 2, we searched very low frequencies, very high frequencies. I'll go on later with, here we are already at Ultimo Esfuerzo Rural number 4. We'll get to that soon. I also wanted to tell a bit about how to control these machines. We don't want to control them, but you need something to start motors or put compressed air in something, so you need a kind of score. And this is part of the score we used for the vacuum cleaners. In the film there were only 24, but in the biggest version there are 48. So there we took something very known in science, but also in gaming, which is cellular automata. Cellular automata is a range of cells that can have different states. In our case, it was on and off, but it can also have, for instance, different colors. It's used in some computer games like the game of life, a game, I think, from the 90s. And here we use it to decide which vacuum cleaner is on, which one is off, because you have a kind of rules that each cell looks at its neighbor if it's alive or dead, and you can have, for instance, a rule of if 2 are alive of 5, the 2 left and at the right and yourself, then you're alive. But if it's 4 and 5, you can make rules like look at how many are alive and then make a new generation. So that's what we did, but we did more. We also, there are different sound groups, and sometimes they are treated separately, like you can see here. Sometimes they are treated as a whole. Anyway, we use this to give out of our hands the decision of how to make a score. What we actually did, we did quite some work. We made a kind of fixed score, so we were cheating ourselves maybe too much. Since then, we have much freer scores. We usually don't do concerts. We do installations where people get a certain amount of a kind of endless score. So what we use now often is either a kind of families and probabilities, like we have, for instance, for the work with the wooden boxes, we have divided a kind of behavior in groups, like very wild behavior, very quiet behavior, and peculiar behavior. And then the computer chooses just a number, and if it's a 5, he will choose something out this group, and etc. So, and what we then want is, for instance, that if somebody is about 5 minutes in the space, that at least he will get a bit of wild, quiet, and peculiar behavior. But we don't want to, we never want to make a score like we go from A to B to C to D. We want to have a kind of balance between the best output you could get from a machine. So, of course, here enters a lot of subjectivity, also how to adjust our machines. It's not that we build just something and that then it will be fine. Often people ask you, where did you find those springs? But on all our works, they are made specifically for a project, and there was calculated how flexible or stiff they should be, etc. It's not so easy to make good music by chance, let's say it that way. Okay, I'll show a few more pictures and then I think it's time for questions. This work is the work Ultimo Esfuerzo Industrial. What we do here, we have quite old motors with reduction wheels, so they go very slowly because there's a kind of gear like you have in a car as well, to make them turn slowly, which looks nice, but it's also for safety very useful. So they move very slowly, and here we use speakers. Here we pick up sounds from the motors, mechanical sounds, but especially also electronic sounds, because the system we use to change the speed produces this kind of tones that you might know from trams or trains or other electric transport systems, depending on the system. Sometimes you hear this things like that when they accelerate or when they brake. So here it's quite different because we amplify the sounds. We also use VJs with it and things like that. It gets very much into techno and noise, but the source is still mechanics. What else do we have? Well, this was in a concert setting in a theater. And this was in a gallery. Here in the gallery, we produce very tiny, small sounds. I was a bit skeptical, but it worked out very well because I liked very much the very powerful concerts with a lot of bass sounds and strong high frequencies. But in the gallery, it was almost like toys that made some sounds here and there. It's always interesting to learn from your own pieces and try out things until you are satisfied. Well, now the last pictures is of the work that's here. It's the 3rd time, and so this was at an art fair in Madrid in February. And the 2nd show was the far out loudest show. It was in a convent in Valladolid, a town in Spain, and we had the whole space for ourselves, and with an enormous amount of reverb. And like here, it was working also each half an hour, 6 minutes. And I was afraid that it would cause problems, but we got many enthusiastic reactions. That's something typical when you work with sound. You always have to adapt to the acoustics of a space, the context. And I think here, well, I don't think I have a picture of here. Here, let's say goodbye. Here it was a hell of a work not to make it too loud, because well, I actually prefer to have our own space, because then, apart from if there are offices or things like that next to you, or people who have the guard, it's always very difficult to make loud sound works in a museum or festival context, because it's made for a public that is there maybe 5 minutes or to half an hour, but not for people who have to be there all day, because they have to work there. And if you have other works there, usually the artists nor the works are getting better when you have loud sounds around all the time. And here you have very loud acoustics, and so I changed the software completely. The number of events is more or less the half or even less than it was in the show before. And it was also very difficult to get them softer, because the system we use is it's an industrial vibrator that uses compressed air. It's just a kind of metal thing, and a metal ball goes around in it because you push air in it. But they need a certain amount of pressure to start. So that's difficult when you work with mechanical components. You just cannot just turn the knob and say, well, we'll put it on this slow level. So a hell of a work to get it to sound like this, but I like it very much, because it's maybe even richer in variations, because we lower than normal. It's much opener than it was in the other two shows. So I think that's it for now. Questions? I hope there were many unclear things, because it's very complex. If not,
I was wondering which of those pieces, projects you show us, you received this Ars Electronica Golden because it was written.
Yeah, that's a piece with the wall of boxes. And before Ars Electronica it was half size, but especially for the price, we actually had already two, because before the price it was already a very popular piece. So we had already two clones, and we put them together. And since then, it's very rare that we showed only half size, because it's so much better. So it was originally it was 7 columns, so 28 boxes and 6 meters wide, and the big version is 12 meters wide. And you can, we like to use this real materials, because you can really have sound in space. And of course, it's much more interesting to have 12 meters for moving sound than 6. So if possible, if we show somewhere, we try to convince everybody that you really have to take the big version. So, but that's the work, and that won the prize in 1998, so almost 20 years ago. That's it?
Is it some of your work in some permanent exhibition?
Well, the outside work in Belgium. It was the first time was 2000 that we built. It was 2006, and I think in 2014 we have completely rebuilt it. The electronics, they were fine. They are in a metal box, but the wood, the wood is it's made by a transport crate company near Valencia. And the first version was tropical wood, but of course the wood that they don't use they only used for transport crates. So the less precious trees in that and of the terrible thing of the forests. And the second version we have now with new boxes. I think the picture was of this. I don't know from when it. I think it was the version. The second version is this very dark wood. What's the name? Cedar wood. Cedar. And it's there now, I think, 3 years. So let's see how long it lasts. Let's see. No, there's also a work that in a museum in Tarragona in Spain, but usually it's in the cellar, and when there's maybe an exhibition where it fits, they show it. But something that ends up in a museum, it's very often that it's not on show all the time. So the only really permanent work is the work in Belgium.
You said like you got the idea about the glass installation because you were on a trip with the ship, and do you think that the glass installation represents the sound 100% as to what you experienced on the ship?
Of course not. It's a starting point. If you want, you can listen just a short piece of the ship, because I have a video of this work, and in the how you call this when a movie starts, when I don't know how you call this in English, you hear a bit of the boat, and it's very the boat is even more orderly, of course, than our work, but it's a starting point. Like also the work with the light reflections. They are changed a lot. Here it's not so much different. Huevo. I think it's in the beginning that you hear this is the ship. It's very repetitive, but it's not that far away from our Here on the ship, it was a relatively small space, so there's not much reverb. While everything you heard on the movie was with an enormous amount of reverb. So that makes also a very big difference in the sound. But the sound of clicking glass, we recreated.
Are there any materials you would like to work with, but didn't have the chance, or?
Well, similar, no? Well, it almost always starts with a kind of experience, and well, for instance, maybe the Ceramics Institute in Holland. This director always says, "Oh, don't you want to make a work with us?" But as long as we don't have a nice experience with the sound of ceramics, I'm not going to stay there. I mean, it just happens, One of our other
Sound of broken ceramics.
Yeah, but this is done also often, not? I don't know. It's more a sound that attracts me than a material. So when you hear an interesting sound, then you start to figure out how to make it. Of course, there was material, so if you hear sound of glass, you're going to use glass. If I have an enormous interesting experience with ceramics, maybe we will do that too. But there's not something like I want to work. Next work will be, I don't know what. It's usually an experience, and then you start to do a lot of research, trial and error also, until you find a way to make it sound. For instance, the work here, those tiny vibrators that we use, I think we saw them maybe 25 years ago or something on an industrial fair, because that's a good place to go to when you want to use those components. And we even didn't buy one until maybe, I don't know how many years ago, in Spain, when somewhere at a company, they had one for 50% off. So we bought one, and then still we didn't manage to do anything interesting with it, because they are made to be fixed to something, and then the whole thing starts to vibrate, but they don't sound well. And then next phase was not to fix them completely so that they can really shake, that they move also a bit more. And then it took again some time before we found out that it's much nicer to just throw them into an object and then manipulate them maybe by just add some tiny things. And so sometimes you have something in the house and you even don't know yet what to do with it. But we like to work with experiences and a lot of instinct. And so there's no planning at all. Like next work will be this, next. No specific material that I'm interested in, apart from sound. That's it? Or last chance? Otherwise, let's stop, no? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you too.